A very warm welcome to all of you to this IDEAthon. And I want to thank you all for taking the time out and joining us for this IDEAthon of ours. We've put in a lot of thought and a lot of effort in bringing this to you. So I really hope you enjoy it. It's already very encouraging to see so many participants or attendees logged in. I can just see that on my screen here. As this IDEAthon progresses, I'm sure more and more people would turn in. So let me just introduce myself before we begin this Ideathon. My name is Victor Shinde. I work at the National Institute of Urban Affairs, which is widely regarded as the think tank for India's Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So my organization has actually been associated with a lot of the popular urban missions that the country has launched recently. Things like the Smart Cities mission, which is quite popular across the world. Then there's also the Amrit mission, there's the Hriday, there's Swachh Bharat Urban, so on and so forth. So yeah, we've been very keenly associated or very closely associated with these missions. What we've also begun to do in the recent past, is just take stock of how our cities are progressing in the quest for development. And one of the things we've been noticing is that in that quest for economic development, somehow the environment has taken a backseat. So it's really important for cities in India, to have that harmonious relationship with the environment. And it is in this context that we actually started one project with the National Mission for Clean Ganga, who incidentally are also the co-organizers of this Ideathon. So this project is related to promulgating a river-sensitive development in our cities. So where the river is being given the value that it deserves, and it's mainstreamed in the whole planning process for the city. So we'll talk about that a little later. But at this moment, maybe I just want to also give you some kind of a background of how this Ideathon came about. What was the thinking in our minds? So NMCG and NIUA, we kind of deliberated on this very topic, and then let me just tell you how that came about. So I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to pull up a PPT, a very short PPT that actually I prepared for this occasion, and I hope you'll be able to see it in just a minute or so. Yeah, I think this should be good. Right, so this Ideathon is on the future of river management, and we're trying to explore how the COVID crisis, can actually shape the river management strategies of the future. So I must mention here that the idea is not to discuss the crisis, so we're not actually discussing the crisis, but we are using the crisis as a setting, as a backdrop to discussing the larger issues related to river management. Now, it's quite evident, when you look at the news, when you talk to people in WhatsApp circles, so on and so forth, that generally there's a sense of gloom, there's a sense of negativity around this COVID crisis, and rightly so, because this is very unprecedented, and it's causing a lot of damage, both in terms of human life and in terms of peace of mind, so on and so forth. But it is also have a kind of flip side to the story, and that is what I have put up on my screen here. It has had some kind of a positive impact on the environment, and especially rivers. Right? Okay, and this is a good thing, no doubt about it. But the problem is, this cannot be the solution, for environment management. What I mean to say here is, we can't rely on a lockdown. We can't rely on a crisis of this sort, to actually cause a change in our environment, because the human element cannot be taken out of the equation. So our job is actually to think a little bit of what has this crisis taught us. So with all the lessons that we are learning, so is it possible for us to leverage on this COVID crisis and do some blue sky thinking, do some innovative thinking on how we go about managing our rivers, in the future. So there are certain questions that we have kind of identified, which we will cover in this webinar. I'm not going to go through all these questions here. You can read them on your screen. But essentially what we have done is we have divided this whole Ideathon into 6 different themes, 6 big themes, which we think are very pertinent when you look at future river management strategies. The first is on robust planning. Here, the focus is very much on cities. because invariably cities are the main negative drivers for rivers. So of course, because of the urbanization, because a lot of pollution is generated in cities, and these have an impact on the rivers. So how do we plan for our cities? Of course, there's a lot of planning that we're doing at the currently, but going into the future, what needs to change? How do we go about that? We'll also talk about adaptive governance. Perhaps the governance systems of today are too rigid in their structure. And I think we need a little bit more flexibility. Our governance system needs to adapt to different drivers, to different conditions. And we'll talk about that as well. Then there is stepped up stakeholder engagement. And we purposely use the term stepped up because stakeholder engagement is there to some extent, but that needs to go another level up now, right? So it has to be a more intense stakeholder engagement, a very often neglected component of river management. But I think this has to become a very central tenet around which the whole river management strategies thrive. Uh, Cherishing biodiversity. So this is another theme. Biodiversity is generally considered in today's time, yes, no doubt, okay, but it's more a peripheral angle. So it's considered at the outside. But now it's high time to bring it from the periphery to mainstream, and bring it right to the heart of planning. And then finally, future proofing, right? So we may be quite aware of what the situation is today with respect to what are the drivers of change, what are the drivers that affect rivers and their management today. But that may not be enough. We also need to peep into the future. We'll need to look at what the anticipated drivers are. What are the big issues out there that we will need to consider, that we need to be prepared for. And we'll talk about that in terms of future proofing. So for each of these 5 themes, what we have done is we have identified 5 speakers, very well distinguished and thorough experts in their fields, who would be talking about, who would be addressing each of these themes one by one. So I'm going to pull up their profiles in a little bit, but before that, I must mention that I have worked very closely with all of them, and it has always been such a great pleasure to work with such ambitious and such motivated people. So it's just such a pleasure to work with motivated people, and we've done with some of them. I've done projects together with some of them. There are some publications we have worked on together, and thank you very much, speakers, for agreeing to be part of this IDEAthon. We very much look forward to what you have to say, and I'm sure the attendees also are looking forward to your talks. So we have Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Mishra. Like I said, he is one of the main drivers for this IDEAthon as well. We are working with him very closely for the project that I am doing. We work directly with him, so that is, that's always a pleasure. So he heads the ambitious National Mission for Clean Ganga flagship initiative that has been launched by the Indian government. It's a fairly ambitious initiative, which has projects worth $3.73 billion. So you can imagine the scale of that. And of course, he has, a very unique thing about Mr. Mishra is he has held top administrative positions in a lot of relevant ministries: Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, and of course, Ministry of Water Resources. So he has that multi-perspective knowledge and understanding about river-related issues, which is so very important when you look at it from governance point of view. We also have Mr. Michael Affel. I had the pleasure of meeting him in Los Angeles a couple of months earlier when we had gone there for a study tour. And he is a practitioner. He's the on the ground person. He's somebody who actually deals with practical issues related to river management, and that is so important. Because sometimes we think theoretically. There may be so many concepts, so many philosophies, but how do you actually translate them to the ground? So he's the best person to talk about that. So he's worked very closely on the Los Angeles river vitalization plan, master plan, and he'll talk a little bit about that as well when his turn comes. We also have Dr. Peter King. He is widely regarded as one of the top environmental specialists in Asia and the Pacific. As you can see from his profile, he's had a long, illustrious career with the Asian Development Bank. leading almost 50 loan and technical assistance projects. And he is currently associated with the Institute of Global Environmental Strategies in Thailand, whose headquarters, of course, is in Japan. And there are a number of interesting initiatives that he is currently involved with. From the biodiversity element, we have Dr. Chris Dickens, with vast experience, 33 years experience in aquatic ecosystem health, water resource protection, water resource management and governance, so on and so forth. So, he has also been associated with developing the river health assessment programs for several countries. Now, how do you assess the river health? It is in that context that I actually met him in Thailand a few years ago. He's now with IWMI. He was in South Africa, but now he's based in Colombo. So it's great to have you, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us. Then we have Dr. Alex Smagel. He is an environmental economist, and then he has a lot of experience and a lot of expertise in the participatory policy and planning approaches. Which has a lot of social element attached to it. A very, very crucial element for river management. So he heads two institutes, two organizations. He's the managing director of the Mekong Futures Research Institute in Thailand, as well as the Sustainable Futures Institute in Australia. So so that is all about the speakers that we had, and I don't mean to flatter the speakers here, but I think for the theme that we have chosen, there could be no better speakers for this. So thank you guys, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure the attendees will would gain a lot from your talk and from your insights. So some quick instructions before we move on. Of course, we would love to hear from you, your questions, your comments, anything that you have. I'd advise you, I'd request you to use the chat box. I'm sure you can figure out where that is, and put in your questions and comments, and we'll try to address as many as possible. Today during this event. If it's not possible, we'll try to get back to you. With that. If you have any connection related issues, there's this number up on your screen. Please WhatsApp, call, whatever, and my colleague Nikita will try to address that for you. I am a little worried about this. In case there's a power failure at my end, the broadcast will still continue. So there may be a little bit of a gap, a 2 or 3 minute gap. Meanwhile, I connect to another source or perhaps use my hotspot, but the broadcast will continue. So so there's nothing to be worried about. Of course, there will be live polls. A copy of this webinar is also going to be hosted online. We'll let you know where exactly this would be hosted. Please just follow our Twitter handles. That is where we make most of our announcements, and then you would know exactly where this copy would be hosted. So with that, I'd like to now invite, the co-organizer. Like I said, NMCG, the National Mission for Clean Ganga, is the co-organizer for this IDEAthon. So I would like to invite Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Mishra, who is the Director General of NMCG, to make some opening remarks, before we head into this IDEAthon. Rajiv, sir, all yours.
And the clean water perhaps becomes very important to prevent many health-related hazards. So I think that keeping that in mind, and again taking that, okay, the improvement has come. What are the lessons for us? I mean, we cannot have this kind of situation normally, and we cannot depend upon these kind of crises to improve our river. The river improvement must be our responsibility, and then we must take it in a long-term basis. Very briefly, I will tell you, and later on we will have chance to discuss more about the governance and after hearing other panelists. When we launched the Namami Ganga program, basically it means integrated river conservation for Ganga and all its tributaries. If you look at our intervention, we also tried to go for the basin approach. And then primarily, I mean, there are many interventions, but we can put them into the 4 bracket. One is basically all kinds of pollution abatement. I mean, it could be municipal sewage, it could be solid waste, it could be industrial pollution, it could be agricultural runoff. So I think one very huge task before us in this mission has been improving the health of the river, the quality of water, and take all kinds of pollution abatement measures. Many sustainable things have done. We are looking at the long-term perspective, the operation and maintenance, what happens to the infrastructure we create, how we can bring private capital into that, private efficiency into that. So we have included hybrid annuity, PPP. I will not get into details. It will take a long time. But yes, the improvements have been showing. But we also were very keen to change the focus from just cleaning to rejuvenation of the river. And that's where we are having a very important input of ecology and flow. When Victor said that there are so many urban missions and slowly urban missions are also looking at the environment, that's exactly, I mean, the Namami Gange can be considered as an urban mission because a lot of investment goes in the urban area as cities are one of the main challenge to the rivers. But at the same time, we also have to look at ecology and flow. Without flow, no river is really a river. So we have to improve the flow in the river and what could be done. River has to be owned by people. It cannot be the case that government or local government or federal government can clean up the river or rejuvenate the river. River cannot be cleaned in one day. It has to be kept clean. It has to be kept rejuvenated. And that's why our mission also very strongly looks at improving people river connect. And several things are being done to improve the condition of bank. As many of you know, this is a river where thousands and thousands of people, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people go to the banks of the river and use it for various purposes. So I think their connect and their awareness is very important to rejuvenate the river. You can see that when people are not going there now in the lockdown, the river condition is improving. You don't see plastics, you don't see floating waste. But we have to learn the lesson from this that if we change our behavior, even if we go to the river, which we reverence so much, we love so much, we have to change our behavior and we have to control ourselves. We have to regulate ourselves. No government can put and do that kind of policing and change each and every individual. So I think that's a very good context and is very good lesson. Then we are also having a number of things in this mission about the research, trying to develop technology and knowledge management. And one policy thing which I am going to flag before in this opening session is the connection between urban planning and river. That's something which we have to keep in mind, and as some of the learned speakers are going to talk about, I'm very happy to see river revitalization master plan. Normally in India, when we look at master plan, we are looking at the city and we consider water, but river-centric planning is not happening. And I will like to quote here from the Honorable Prime Minister when he was chairing the National Ganga Council meeting. I mean, that's the Apex Council which he was chairing, and he was very clear in his mind when he asked a question that how we treat river cities, and he was very clear that we must think of a different way of planning for the river cities, and then they should be looked at, and we should look at a kind of a stretch of the river and then how many habitations come. So that's why when we look at urban planning, we have to look at how they could get into that. We also must look at this point, WHO is telling a concept of one health. I mean, we must look at health of everyone, and then only when cities are healthy, things will be improving, only when the villages are healthy. So I think when we look at that kind of multi-sectoral working together, these kind of conferences will be very useful. Personal hygiene behavior has changed in the COVID. Can we learn the lesson and continue it beyond the lockdown period also? Because these are some of the things what we can learn from that. And then what are the challenges when we learn from all those things? Biodiversity is very important. In our mission, when I said ecology, we have a very strong commitment to improve the forest along the river. And we also have a very extensive program, first of its kind, to look at the fishery resources, look at the dolphins, gangetic dolphins, look at various other biodiversity and scientifically map all of them. So when all these things are happening, and then we have now seen this COVID is perhaps the greatest thing. Many people in India, I mean, those who are from India, you know, people always have a kind of a skepticism. Can we clean the river like Ganga? Yes, this has shown that if we control our behavior, if we regulate ourselves, river will rejuvenate. River has the capacity, and especially river like Ganga has capacity to rejuvenate. So I think we are in for a very interesting discussion with different aspects, as Victor said, being covered. And I am anyway going to get another chance to talk to you about some of the governance things what we can learn. So at this stage, I once again welcome each one of you on the behalf of National Mission for Clean Ganga, and hope we learn together and then move ahead in this great task of rejuvenating our rivers and look at a very bright future of river management. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, sir, for setting this context. And I think, as Rajiv sir correctly pointed out, I think the interest in river management, especially the interlinkages with the cities, is right at the top, right from the Prime Minister's office in India. So I think that's a wonderful way to put it here. Okay, so from the PMO's office now, maybe let's move on to 2, 3, 4 time zones away to Michael, who is in the US, in Los Angeles. It's very late for him there. It's 10:30 p.m. So thank you so much for staying up for this event, Michael. And we also know that America, the US is the worst hit when it comes to the COVID crisis. But I'm sure there must be some thinking going on there. As to what how can this COVID crisis actually inform some lessons for river management in LA. You have also been involved with the LA River Master Revitalization Master Plan, so on and so forth. So please tell us a little bit about what could be from a planning perspective, planning for the river. How do we make our planning more robust? What are the new approaches that we could use? And where should we be going from here? Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Victor and Rajiv. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you, and I am humbled to join such a distinguished panel, and I will try to be brief because I'm very interested in what they have to say as well. So I have just a few slides to help illustrate our situation, so I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get that pulled up. Okay. Is that coming through now? Okay. So really, those are really good framing questions about our current COVID crisis. And just to be perfectly honest, I don't know that we've really thought through all of the ways that intersects with the work that we're doing. I want to first just take a few minutes to kind of walk through our context in Los Angeles and some of the work that's going on, and then pause and try to think about some of the questions that you've raised. So again, my name is Michael Affelt, and I work for the city of Los Angeles, and I work for Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, and I lead a small team under one of his deputy mayors, and we're focused on Los Angeles River revitalization all 24, I mean, not 24 hours a day. I mean, it feels like it sometimes, but full time is what I mean to say. So just some quick context. Here's Los Angeles, obviously a highly urbanized area in California in the western United States. And the Los Angeles River runs right through the heart of the city and drains an 800 square mile watershed. The river itself is 51 miles long. 32 of those miles are within the city of Los Angeles. So that's my primary purview. And the entire system, including the tributary streams and waterways, is engineered, as you'll see in the pictures. This is to give you an idea of what the Los Angeles River looks like today. It's fully engineered, like I said, channelized from basically the top of the watershed to the bottom. It has slightly different character throughout its length. This last picture I'll go back to. A bit narrow as it in the early reaches of its length. Widens out and has a naturalized but still engineered bottom as it winds its way through around our mountain range, the Santa Monica Mountains, that kind of travels right through the middle of the city. And then as the river travels through the downtown part of Los Angeles, even wider and fully concrete, probably recognizable from various film scenes. The river continues south south of the city of Los Angeles, and ultimately empties out into the Pacific Ocean at the Port of Long Beach. So as you referred to, we do have a master plan that was adopted back in 2007 that lays out ideas about how to revitalize the river and envisions a future state of the river that is, in many ways, still an engineered system, because for flood risk management, flood control, it has to function that way, but brings back nature, wildlife, plants, and people back to the banks of the river. And, one thing that I like to point out is that Los Angeles, if anyone has ever, I know, Victor, you've had the pleasure of joining us. It was great to host you. if anyone else has been there, our downtown, unlike other coastal cities, is not located at the ocean. We're 12, 13 miles in from the ocean because the city was founded on the banks of the river. And of course, many, many thousands of years before that, people made their homes and their communities along the banks of the river before urbanization. So the river is really, Los Angeles is a river city, even though it is, has been disconnected from its river since channelization happened. This is some context of the natural areas around Los Angeles. So I'm not sure if you can see my pointer that well, but mountain ranges, this is the Santa Monica Mountains that through the city, the San Gabriel Mountains, some smaller ranges of Verdugos. And the river's path right through all those, including its tributaries, is a natural connector for these natural areas. But it doesn't serve that purpose now. And so I'll say just on the biodiversity and habitat front, that is a huge focus of the goals for river revitalization, especially in the early years when groups of folks sought to motivate both the residents here as well as the government to rethink, how we can reconnect to this river after it was channelized for flood risk back in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. So sort of nature first was really the motivator for now this era of revitalization that we're in. And the biggest dreams that we have, the biggest goals that we have are really centered on nature, on ecosystem restoration, on habitats. This slide here depicts a federal plan. So it was developed as a partnership between the city and the federal government to look at how to really dramatically remake some parts of the river. And this is one of the most important areas along the river's course through in the area where it still has an earthen bottom. This is a parcel that the city has acquired, and this represents the vision that we want to turn this into. So very nature-focused habitat restoration. But I think, and getting to some of the prompt questions that I think are really well posed, the human-oriented goals and achievements are really what is setting the stage for many of the big dreams about restoration that are still in the future because they're extremely difficult, very expensive, and they're challenging from a flow perspective, from an engineering perspective. So we've made small steps along the way. This actually is not the river itself. This is a project called the Edp Reyes Riverway that leads into the river, which travels from right to left at the end of this, out of our view. Parks along the river of small to moderate scales. And I think most critically for us, a public access system along the river's bank that we still haven't completed, that I really consider job one for us. That connectivity, we have bits and pieces that exist in this dark blue color. And when I say we, I mean the region at large. There are many governmental players here. But the yellow here, if you can see it, represents gaps in our public access system, meaning trails and bike paths, where there still is not access to the river's bank. And you can imagine why, I'm skipping way back, when you look at pictures like this. The highly industrial context on both sides of the river, very difficult to access. So creating that access and setting the stage for that human engagement with the river and fostering a connection for larger groups of people, raising expectations, fostering education and understanding of the river, I think is what helps us set the stage for bigger things. And we're starting to see it happen even through what the private sector is proposing. This is a project that who knows now in where it is with the economic situation that's going to be in front of us for the next couple of years. But it's an illustration from a private developer in the downtown area that is proposing a mixed-use development right on the banks of the river because they now want to embrace it. And embracing the river is, I really think, is this really important step one that we are still working on. Like I said, it's still job one that's not complete. So we're working on all these things at the same time. We're working on ecosystem restoration. We're working on water quality. Certainly, we're working on parks and open space. And I'm involved in all of those. But I got to say, the thing that I really want to spend, and I do spend so much of my energy on, is that fundamental job of bringing people to the river, creating that engagement, that connection, and then using that to set the stage. So you're right, Victor, that I do have a kind of a practical sense to this. Like I said, I'm so humbled to be on part of this panel of distinguished thinkers and academics. I don't have any doctors in front of my name or many letters on the backside of my name either. But we're just working every day to try to bring people to the river, and that's kind of our main goal right now. So with that, I'll turn it over back to you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I mean, that is exactly what we wanted. A very practical element to this whole discourse, to this discussion, and it's perfectly okay if you don't have a doctor before your name. So it really it's perfectly okay. All right. Well, I think just a couple of things that clearly emerged from your talk. Nature first. Absolutely, and that is how we must proceed with river management. Embracing the river. That increasing that citizen river connect. This is something that we in India also are looking at very closely, because this is, once that connect is increased, the value for the river is automatically increased. So absolutely, and we're so glad that you're kind of reiterating and reinforcing the thoughts that we have here in India. So from the US, let's now move on to Australia. We'll move on to Peter King, Dr. Peter King, and he's going to be talking about future proofing. So we request Peter, if you could tell us, so what are the big issues out there that we should be prepared for? That cities, that governments, that all of us should be aware of, we should prepare for, and how do we go about it? Peter, all yours.
Okay. It's said that the only thing we can learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. And as we look back to the 1918, 1919 so-called Spanish flu, we have to think about what happened after that. The Roaring Twenties. What happened in the Roaring Twenties? In the US, the economy grew by 42%. The stock exchange went up 12% per annum. People went crazy with consumption. They were buying everything they could get their hands on. Those of you who have seen the movies from that time, the flappers and the whole sort of nightclub scene really took off. So in a post-COVID-19 world, are we going to see countries retreat to disease-safe fortresses, continue to block off their borders, or are they going to be open to greater multilateralism, increased globalization, massive return to economic growth, the big bang that President Trump refers to? How we actually emerge from COVID-19 has tremendous implication for issues like transboundary management of rivers. And I think without putting the crystal ball on, it is still very unclear which direction we will go following the cessation of this pandemic. And in addition to the pandemic being a global crisis, of course, climate change is the other most serious biophysical driver of river management, not just in terms of the impact on river flows, droughts and floods, but also in terms of water demand for industry, for agriculture, for urban consumers, And each river basin manager is going to need to examine multiple scenarios of the impact of climate changes based on multiple scenarios. And so exactly how river basin managers will deal with the impacts of climate change is clearly one of the major drivers of the future of river basin management. Now, in addition, increasingly issues of upstream versus downstream interests are of critical importance. If upstream countries or states or provinces just apply management according to their own needs, then the downstream domains may suffer very badly. We see that, for example, in the Mekong River, where China is dominating the upstream portion, and some of the midstream countries are increasingly developing hydropower with major impacts on Vietnam, which is at the far end of the river system. And this points to the need for very effective river basin commissions and management systems with powers that go beyond local jurisdictions. And I'm sure Rajiv Saab is facing that constantly in relation to the Ganges in terms of upstream versus downstream interests. The fourth major driver is the increased encroachment of development into floodplains. Urban development, especially informal settlements, industry location to discharge waste to rivers or to extract cooling water, and infrastructure development are all having adverse impacts on river health and making river management more difficult. As Michael has just given us some terrific images of the final outcome of this engineering type approach to river management. Final driver is the increasing number of hydropower plants and dams on all the major rivers in Asia. This is not only having serious impacts on river flows, but is also impeding sediment discharge, which in turn is impacting on agricultural areas that depend on annual floods and deltaic regions that are suffering the combined effects of bank erosion, soil erosion, and saline intrusion due to increasing sea level rise due to climate change. And then finally, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this, river basin management should be based on accurate data and reliable modeling. But increasingly, river basin management is subject to political interference and a beggar thy neighbor attitude. And together, the cumulative impact of all of these drivers makes effective river basin management so much harder than it need be. To return to the issue of transboundary management, two useful tools that are not being used enough, in my view, and not being used effectively, are strategic environmental assessment and transboundary environmental impact assessment. Strategic environmental assessment is particularly useful as it can encompass the entire basin and help to overcome national, sectoral, and provincial barriers and different perspectives. And transboundary EIA is particularly useful for the big projects like the mainstream dams and hydropower plants. And both these tools, even where applied, will need much greater public participation. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about the need for greater public participation than governments currently allow. Now, I would be remiss in not mentioning some positive drivers for more effective river basin management. These include tools like geographic information systems, satellite imagery, the use of drones, better 2D and 3D models, and big data and artificial intelligence. All of these need to be pressed into service and river basin managers trained in their use. And of course, adoption of these tools is costly. So the final driver is finance. River basin managers definitely need to make the case for increased funding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. For those insightful comments. I think we completely agree with you. You're bang on. Climate change is absolutely one of the biggest drivers, and it's globally that we see that a lot of emphasis, a lot of focus on climate change related activities. I really like the idea of having a little bit of having a techno savvy outlook towards river management. In terms of big data, artificial intelligence. I think this is seriously something that there has not been too much done as that. If I remember, it's habitat mapping, so on and so forth. But yes, absolutely, you're right. This is something that researchers, government organizations can actually tap into. Because this is the in thing. And you've pointed out encroachment as a driver, the hydropower, also empowering river basin management organizations. So and that's so important. Because it's more often than not, it's the administrative organizations that are empowered, but somehow the RBOs or the river basin organizations, they don't. So thank you so much for these wonderful insights. And I saw there are a lot of questions, and we'll come back to you in a little while from now. But for now, let's just go from Melbourne. We go to Colombo, where we have our colleague Dr. Chris Dickens from IWMI. So he's going to be talking a little bit about the biodiversity angle of river management. So Chris, when this pandemic thing when this thing came, COVID crisis just happened. One of the things that came to my mind immediately, are we also looking at a river crisis? Going the way things are, is a river crisis on the cards, and is it just around the corner or so? And you're probably the best one to tell us about it. Also, maybe if you can also let us know, because you have also been involved with a lot of assessment programs for a number of countries, national assessment programs. If you can talk a little bit more in terms of how do we prepare in terms of information systems to information data systems in order to inform management of the rivers in the future. Chris, over to you.
Morning, Victor, and greetings, everybody. Yes, so Victor's given me the title of Cherishing Biodiversity, and in the context of the crisis that we're in at the moment, and what about a crisis in biodiversity in relation to rivers and so on. And one of the things which is become really clear in society, that it's really important that we retain biodiversity in whatever ecosystem we have, because it's a natural thing that the greater the biodiversity, the greater the resilience, not only of the ecosystem, but also of us who depend on the ecosystem. Because the greater the biodiversity, if you happen to knock out a part of that biodiversity because of some particular pollutant or something, then at least there's another part of the biodiversity that survived, which can take over. With climate change, biodiversity is going to be put under enormous pressure, because as it gets hotter, different species are going to become our food sources. Like in most parts of Africa, maize will no longer grow because it's going to get too hot. Things like that. So biodiversity is really important. And in a river, we actually live really closely associated with the biodiversity and with the functional ecosystem. And generally, most people aren't aware of that. But the very fact that we can get relatively clean water out of a river ecosystem is because the ecosystem is functional. Water for drinking, for industry, for agriculture, for recreation. We can use that river to even carry away our waste for us. And if we do it carefully, it'll be okay, because the processes of the river will eat up the waste and purify the water. And we can actually live in a sort of mutual dependency on the ecosystem itself. So the biodiversity in rivers is really important. So what about crises? And I'm going to give you two examples of crises, because we've had this COVID thing where, to a large extent, the world was unprepared. Well, take this example. This was a pollution spill that happened in the Danube River. So in 2000, 100,000 cubic meters of tailings dam slurry from a gold mine. The big tailings dam was not designed to overflow, so it had no spillway, and they happened to have a lot of ice and a lot of rain, and eventually the tailings dam collapsed. 100,000 cubic meters of cyanide and heavy metals in a solution form into the river, and it went through Romania, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, and and obviously created havoc. So the cyanide was combined with copper, and it's completely soluble in water, so it drifted happily down the river. And as you know, cyanide is really toxic. And so it created havoc with the ecosystem as it went down the river. And lo and behold, 6 weeks later, another tailings dam collapsed, but this time mostly with heavy metals. But lots of lead, copper, zinc also then got dumped into the river. And this is different because the heavy metals tended to actually not float in the water for very long, but actually settle out into the sediments. So it affected these two plumes affected 2,000 kilometers of river. And you can imagine with the cyanide, you basically now got a plug of cyanide-rich water moving down the river, just wiping everything out as it went down the river. And the ecosystem just had no chance. The people were able to actually monitor it coming, and then they would stop abstracting water for the city as the plug arrived and hold their breath and store as much water as they could in their reservoirs, etc., until the water had gone past. But also the water treatment process can actually remove cyanide. So it wasn't such a crisis for drinking water. But for recreation, certainly, and using the water for agriculture and so on was all a problem. You had to be really careful not to use that cyanide water. The heavy metals are a much longer lasting effect because those heavy metals then accumulated in the sediments and will continue to have an impact for years to come, because especially things like lead are very persistent, and they could turn up in people's brains and could affect people's health for many years to come. In the short term, it killed 120,000 tons of fish in Hungary alone. It didn't kill everything. It killed everything close up near the spill, but then as you got further down, it got diluted. And so the kill was less and less and less as you went down. What was remarkable is that the river recovered quite quickly. And this is a key issue. It recovered because very often from tributaries and off-channel pools and things like that, the biodiversity was able to repopulate the river. So especially things like invertebrates can repopulate the river literally in months, whereas fish will take a few years, but they came back really, really quickly. And this particular pollution event was also helped by a big flood. And they also tried to release water from an upstream dam, which was really expensive. So the solutions from this is obviously things like flushing the water with dams, and then the refuge areas for biodiversity. But what was really key here was to know what was going on, to have enough data that you could actually measure the plume of cyanide as it came down the river and knew where it was so that you could actually manage it. So you knew what the concentrations were, how dangerous they were, and you could actually respond accordingly. The pollutants in the sediments is a much more difficult issue, because not all of that enters into the water that you use, but you generally have a slow recycling from the sediment back into the water column, and so the fish will generally be polluted, the algae will generally be polluted, and so if you're using water on your growing your lettuce or eating the fish, you are going to continue to get heavy metals from that. So it's good to have a handle on that. How safe is that water to use? Right, another crisis that happened was in the Murray-Darling River in Australia, where they had a toxic bloom of algae that covered 1,000 kilometers of the river. And blue-green algae they're toxic, they smell like crazy, the water turns into like thick PVA paint, and it had a huge impact. And they had to actually issue a national state of emergency. And this happens all over the world. This is not only in Australia. I come from South Africa, and we've had many situations where it killed rhinoceroses, and there was one farm where 240 dairy cows died in one day because they drank water from a concrete reservoir that had blue-green algae in it. So it can be really toxic. And the issue here is to monitor the presence of algae in freshwater systems so that you actually know what you're dealing with. And I used to work for a water facility, and we used to monitor the dam water all the time, keeping a check on the blue-green algae. And the minute it started to spike, we then had to up the treatment process in the waterworks. Sometimes it would cost 10 times as much to treat the water once the algae were there, because you had to add a further treatment process using activated carbon and so on to scrub the toxins and the bad tastes and odors and so on that they give out. So there are lots of solutions to these. You can go back to the cause of limiting nutrients which are the cause of the algae growth. So agriculture, excessive fertilizer, and sewage, and so on. The blue-green algae are caused by a very low nitrogen-phosphorus ratio. So you can actually try to manage the ratio of nitrogen-phosphorus to keep the nitrogen higher and the lower, and phosphorus, the nitrogen higher and the phosphorus lower, and then you won't get blue-green algae. But key is knowing what you're doing, having data, and that's essential. There are lots of other crises that you get in rivers. Floods and droughts are much more common. We get them all the time, and we have to deal with those. Again, data is important, and it's important that the ecosystem can actually return from these crises, and it needs that. What it needs is refugia. That the crisis can't be of such a long duration that it actually eventually wipes out everything. In nature, like for example, you can have a drought where the river can dry out completely, but when the water comes back, the river will recover because there's still the odd pool here and there that's got biodiversity in it. Some of the biodiversity survives in egg form below the sand and things like that. But if you make the drought too long, artificially long, you eventually kill everything. So getting back to Victor's last point, the kind of data and so on we need. So in these examples, you can see we need data about toxins, about algae, about heavy metals. You need to be monitoring all the way down the river in water resources that you're using. And essentially, to really manage a river properly, you need data on the quantity of water, the quality of the water, the habitats, whether the river is actually functional, and also the biodiversity. You actually need to have a little bit of knowledge about all of those things. You never know which is going to be the really important part. And when you actually use that data in broader river management action plans and so on, it's good to have a healthy dose of data describing the whole biodiversity, and then you can actually really manage it properly, and you can learn to live within the capacity of the ecosystem and the biodiversity to support humanity. We can't go to this old thing of just use and use and use and use until there's nothing left. We have to learn to live within the capacity of the ecosystem to provide. We need to have data to know what that capacity is, and we need to have data to know before it happens whether the ecosystem is on the verge of collapsing or not. We need to know where we are in relation to the ecosystem that we are dependent on. So there's no substitute for data. You really need it. Thank you, Victor.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. And I think honestly, you painted quite a scary picture, actually. With the cyanide pollution, with the algal blooms. But I guess that is what is really required, to get that thinking, to get that thinking going. The fact that you mentioned about the nutrient loading in the rivers because of the algal blooms, I kind of just related it to Peter's presentation just a little while ago with climate change coming in. So I think we can anticipate more such events. And unfortunately, when a river crisis occurs, the COVID crisis, of course, has got a lot of eyeballs, a lot of attention. But perhaps this river crisis might be an equally catastrophic event. So thanks a lot also for elaborating on the data techniques. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think we need to get that data in place to ascertain what the absorbing capacity of the environment is, of the ecosystems is, and future river governance, especially from this aspect, would need to focus on that. So thanks a lot, Chris. That was a wonderful talk. Now from Colombo, let's go back to Melbourne. So Alex, although he works in Thailand, but currently because of this COVID crisis, he is based at hometown in Melbourne, and he's going to talk to us about the stakeholder engagement or the participatory processes, which also Peter kind of mentioned in his talk as well. This is often a very neglected component of river management. But I personally, now that I'm working in this sector, especially in the practical aspect, I feel this is perhaps the most important. Alex, you have the onus of dealing with the most important aspect of river management. So please go ahead.
No pressure. Thanks, Victor, and thanks, Rajiv, for having me and to give me a few minutes to talk about participation. Well, participation has definitely become some sort of a very trendy topic over the past few years. And I think this is mainly because of all the failures we have experienced. Failures, not just in terms of water management, but much broader in terms of natural resource management, sustainability, failures of this policy science interface. And because I think in the past, sort of coming from a scientific perspective, scientists often assume that they simply do their magic, apply their method, do their analysis, and then they present the results, and automatically we will have lots of policy impact, lots of changes. Unfortunately, there is now quite a lot of evidence that most scientific studies, the majority, had zero policy impact, which is obviously really frustrating for scientists, and not just for scientists, but also for policymakers. And from a policy perspective, there have been many plans that have been developed, partly even on evidence, that were very difficult or potentially impossible to implement because there was, diverting stakeholder interests, or there was evidence they did not take into account. So there's a lot of history in there, a lot of failure that sort of triggered this trend to look into participation. And we believe that I think a first reaction of science in particular was to look a lot into communication and how to improve communication. And we believe this is sort of part of the solution, but only a small part. We believe the really big issue is a lack of engagement, what you just alluded to, Victor. And there's quite a lot of evidence for it. So when we started working on this maybe 15 years ago, so then there was maybe a handful agencies trying to look at this policy science interface from a research perspective. And what we, for instance, started doing back then was to run many different engagement processes, stakeholder engagement processes, which we then compared. And through this comparative analysis, trying to understand what is really important, what counts, what makes a difference, and what are sort of the key lessons learned to actually, if you follow this recipe, then you can have, a higher likelihood of policy impact, and then the policy impact would then actually lead to really sort of, really sustainable outcomes. And we also did for a few years, a bigger collaboration with some European agencies and also Australian agencies, to compare what they learned and what we learned and so on, which was really insightful. So based on all these lessons, what we developed quite a few years ago was a learning-focused engagement process, a framework that we applied now to quite a few different situations, mostly within basin planning contexts. And yeah, they have yielded really to fantastic results, even in situations where we had a lot of conflict. We called that, engagement framework. We developed the challenge and reconstruct learning framework, big scientific name. And there's quite a lot of scientific publications out there. If, any of the participants here of this little webinar wants to drop their email, I'm happy to share these publications with you if you don't have access to them. And as I mentioned, we applied them in many different countries, especially in Asia, not just in Asia, also in Europe, US, in Australia, and also in India. And in India, we worked, for instance, on groundwater with lots of communities in Rajasthan and Gujarat. That was part of the Mavi project, which just was granted, I think, $1 billion to be upscaled in collaboration with the World Bank. So you see that with stakeholder engagement, I think you can really, if you do it right, you can actually achieve quite a lot. Now, what I decided not to do today is to give you now lots of detail about our framework, but rather try to share a few, I would call them, main lessons learned. And because of the few minutes I have, I only try to focus on a few, let's say 5 lessons learned. So the first lesson I would love to share is the relevance of engaging with multiple levels of governance. This is really from the household level, communities, districts, states, central government, and in many cases, even international decision makers, like, the donor community. And then also, involving NGOs and other, for instance, stakeholders from the research community to have really a wide breadth represented and interest represented in such a participatory process. So one of the main mechanisms, and one of the mechanisms we found is really effective, is to develop, either build on existing multi-level working groups or cross-sector working groups, or establish completely new ones. And from our experience, it's actually quite encouraging to see that every time we established a new one within a basin or within a country or within a transboundary context, then mostly these groups actually continue to exist beyond the lifetime of our project, which was really cool. So the first lesson learned is really sort of to understand the relevance of involving multiple levels of governance or decision making. The second one is, for a lot of scientists, really difficult to grasp, but because it's so close to psychology, I guess, it's really trying to understand stakeholder values and stakeholder beliefs. I believe this is absolutely critical for what we would call a learning process, and I come back to this big learning point. Because individuals, they're also decision makers, planners, they all hold their individual values and beliefs, and that totally influences the decisions they make, and also sort of their ability to listen to you and to your new data and to your new modeling. And if you don't understand that, you will, present your results, and it's very likely that you will have zero impact. And we have been working for many years with lots of psychological methods. In our projects in the past, we involved actually often psychologists to refine this engagement process. So stakeholder beliefs, stakeholder values is the second point. The third point is, and often I think about this as potentially the most relevant lesson learned, is to develop shared visions. And it's so shared visions, I mean with that, visions as in, desirable future situations with multiple stakeholders. And I think this is really interesting if you think about COVID or other situations of crisis, that if everybody is really on the page and you run through such a process, then the ad hoc adaptation that is happening on the ground, you don't really need to steer that much if everybody really buys into this vision, because as you adapt straight on the ground to this new crisis, you would do it in a way that you still have this vision in mind. So I believe these shared visions are absolutely critical for any river basin planning process. And we use, in our way, lots of different creative steps. We tested them, what's the impact and which one is most effective, and in which country, in which cultural context. And often we involve artists, and we test, when to involve which kind of scientific analysis and so on. Anyway, shared visions, that's the third point. The fourth point is also often difficult to grasp for sort of the research community, is trying to understand political risks. I see a lot of studies being presented where the teams have really zero understanding of what a political risk is. And so political risks are really pertinent if you think about complex situations, and where you have a lot of potentially unintended side effects. And so what I mean with that is that, for instance, if you do your hydrological study, you don't focus only on hydrological indicators, but you also, for instance, include socioeconomic consequences, because they are actually, you need to make this conversion, this translation, because they're much closer to the risks that are, so the political risks perceived by decision makers and planners. So understanding risks is sort of my fourth point. And the fifth point is where I started off. It's really this paradigm shift that we stop sort of presenting evidence in a way that we try to convince policymakers, and we try to sort of tell them these are the facts, now you have to do something, but rather take them by the hand and conduct a learning exercise to allow them to discover something new. And if they discover something, we experience that over and over again. This is really powerful learning for them, and then the decision makers really own this solution, and things really change. So these 5 points would really be, for me, sort of key ingredients to ensure policy impact and real-world changes. There's many more lessons I could change, but obviously time is running out for me to speak. If somebody wants to drop me their email, I'm happy to send publications around, and I hope you find these lessons helpful. Thanks for giving me the time. Thanks, Victor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. I think you're going to receive a lot of emails, with requests for your publications. but yeah, thanks. And I was just noting down the 5 lessons that you taught. Multiple levels of governance, stakeholder beliefs, doing that, shared visions, taking political risks. And what I really liked is also allowing politicians, allowing decision makers to discover the beauty of the engagement process. And to be very honest, in India especially, we are still, we perhaps are not completely there. But I think these are good lessons, maybe not just for India, but any river management authority across the world, that this is what we should be envisaging, as we step into the future. So thank you very much, Alex, for that. And we're now back to where we started, to India. Okay, so from Melbourne back to India, to New Delhi, to the NMCG office, and we're going to request Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Mishra to talk a little bit about the adaptive governance. So when we talk about the governance, perhaps we have a very rigid system today. But what are the challenges? And sir, you are in charge of perhaps one of the biggest organizations as per se. Maybe not really a river basin organization, but an organization that manages the river in the whole world. So I'm sure, and you know the in and outs, the nitty-gritties of the governance aspects. So what are the big challenges that we have? How do we address them in the future? So where do we go from here in terms of river governance? Over to you, sir.
Talk about governance. Several things which you people have shared will all be very relevant. The key lies in being adaptive. And as you very rightly said, the governance model to deal with such a kind of problem, river management, river rejuvenation, these are typically in public administration parlance very akin to something like a big problem. Not simple solution, multiple stakeholders, so many level of governments are involved in these kind of solutions. So I think the way in which various institutional arrangements evolve to take care of changing needs and the requirements of people, that actually constitutes success or failure of a adaptive governance. Few thoughts I have to share on this. The very evolution of National Mission for Clean Ganga and Namami Gange program, if you look at last few years, is an example of adapting, learning from experience and making certain changes and bringing a kind of governance framework which is a little different. How it is different, I will very quickly explain, because we started with a very typical government structure. Then perhaps government realized that you have to more develop like a kind of project structure, a mission kind of a structure. And then for the first time in 2015, 2016 onwards, and a structure has been created where the National Ganga Council is at the apex level, at the level of Prime Minister, and there is a kind of one-to-one correspondence. It goes up to the lowest level administrative unit, that is the district level it goes. So I think that kind of governance model has come, but and matched by a lot of processes, the delegation, lot of authorities, it's very unique way of Peter made one of the driver as finance. So for the first time in this mission, that has been taken care of to a great extent by giving you a kind of surety of finance for 5 years. So you can plan for 5 years. It's not the annual budget which lapses and goes away. So I think that's something which is very important. If you look at such kind of big picture, such kind of big mission, then I think certain certainty, certain process improvement in governance is necessary. And not that it all happened in one go in our case also, but we have been evolving. And now a kind of framework has come in the case of Ganga, which is seen to be, which is perceived to be reaching some of the goals. Not very easy. Still many things are to be done. And I think this framework is now going to be applied to some extent for the other rivers in the country also. So that's one. Second point, perhaps I would like to draw the attention of everyone that the vision for water governance, I think one place we all can look and we all look is SDG. The SDG 6, which is on the water, but there are various other SDG which also talks about water. So I think the key thing which I will pick from the SDG, apart from the affordability of access to water, clean water, which is very important again in the case of COVID or these kind of disaster, but it talks about water ecosystem protection. Again, the biodiversity, the wetland, the various kinds of ecosystem it talks. So that's very important. We have talked quite a lot by now about the basin management. And we started with Ganga River Basin Management Plan. We are also we are also new in the country on the basin management plan and basin management organization. So governance is the NMCG, how it can evolve as a kind of true river basin organization and manage all this task is one of the challenge on which we are proceeding. And with the help of India, European Union Water Partnership, we are trying to look at the river basin planning and management cycle, because adaptive things means, what you plan cannot be static. So over a period of 5 years, we can decide upon that period. You will relook, you again visit some of the targets and then see that in terms of quality where you reach, in terms of water quantity, what parameters you have reached. So I think that's something, the river basin management cycle approach we are trying to adopt, and then that's not an easy thing. And as has been explained, there are various stakeholders. I think Mr. Peter talked very rightly about the upstream, downstream issues. Different states have different vision, different goals. What you are talking in terms of the international thing in the context of Ganga, we have got 5 states. These states are really quite huge states on the bank of the river, on the main stem, but the basin has 6 more states. So I think how to reconcile their need and then how to actually bring them together to certain shared goal is an important. Another thing, another challenge or another thing in the governance is we have to look at interconnection of the water system. It cannot be river alone. So I think in 2016 we have got a kind of river authority framework given to Namami Gange, under which we are trying to look as a single system. So river, tributaries, wetland, groundwater and surface water interaction, rainwater, wastewater and small rivers. So all of them have to be taken together, and suppose you apply this to an urban system, a city, then that urban river management plan should not be only looking at 1 or 2 aspects, but you have to, someone has to look at all of them together, because river does not really differentiate between the city boundary and river boundary and natural boundary. It will really flow, and then that's something which we have to learn to manage them as a single unit and how it can be done. Another thing, we talked about several aspects, but river is also a kind of cultural entity, and that's why the connect with the river is very important. And what Michael told in the beginning, embracing the river is very important. Embracing the river, what we are doing is, cities are developing on the back of river, and sometimes unfortunately cities become so big the river gets lost in that, and that's a kind of very, that's not a very happy situation to be. So that's something which we have to work together, and that's where the urban planning, the river city planning is important. And I will also add here, when we are talking about the planning, which was also discussed in the National Ganga Council, we have to look at a stretch of the river and look at various cities and even some of the large villages which are coming, and then think of a kind of regional planning. So that's again something that governance, that adaptation we have to do. As we first improve the city management and the connect of city and the river, we also have to go little beyond and look at the river boundary. Let's take a stretch of 20, 30, 50 kilometers of the river, miles of the river, and then look at what all habitations are there and how we can plan for all of them together. So that's very important thing which we are doing. Another area where perhaps we can learn and we can start working, the valuation of ecosystem service of the river. I mean, we have already talked about the ecosystem and then try to learn within the capacity of the ecosystem. Unfortunately, we really do not value them in economic terms. Everything cannot be tangible and economic value, but people understand if you say that this water is going to, I mean, gives you so much of value, perhaps we'll have more respect to conserve water and then protect those water sources. So economic valuation of ecosystem services of the river is another area which perhaps we have to do a lot of work, and we are trying to develop some approach of doing that. Many people have talked, and that was also part of my agenda of the governance system, adaptive governance, is information. We have so many things in the basin, so many different aspects, as some of you have already told, and different ministries manage different information, different departments manage different set of things. So how you can really bring them together and develop a kind of good information platform, information system on quality, quantity, biodiversity, flow, so many things. So that's something very important. Something positive has happened at the Government of India level. We have a kind of consolidation of various ministries into one ministry at present. So that's happening. But that process is not easy, and that process has to go on. Technology again going to play a major role as we look at not only the treatment technology but the GIS. So what we have done, we have tried to do a very good scientific, very high resolution DEM model of mapping using GIS in various forms, and then that's something which we are doing. Another aspect I would like to talk is how we can link the development, economic development, livelihood of people with the conservation, with the river, the health of the river. Because if that model can be developed, in a clear way. And see, we have done some pilots. We have tried to develop some community volunteers, community outreach we have tried to do, and then we have tried to give them a skill so that their livelihood improves. And then we don't pay them, but with their livelihood increase, perhaps they are taking care of one stretch of the river, 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers, small stretches of the river. So now we are trying to develop with the help of other ministries what we call Earth Ganga. I mean, basically trying to develop a kind of economic development model combining with the conservation, eco-friendly development. So I think that will require help from several ministries, understanding by several ministries and agencies. So that we are trying to now attempt. And the key to all these things, the key for all these data. I mean, I will give you just one example of data. I mean, the need of data in future we have to understand. At present in the COVID crisis, the migrants, the data about the migrant population in the city. I mean, where do they live? How many of them are there? I mean, we realize in many places that we did not have adequate data about them. So I think that's again something to this. The local water source improvement is again very important for our governance, because often we are bringing water from quite far off place for drinking to a place. So I think we have to develop the local source so that the load upon city, the load upon the river, and lot of cost also can be minimized. So once again, before I end, two things. People connect is very important. This COVID crisis has shown that rivers can rejuvenate. Some of you also told the example that thousands of tons of fishes died and so much of pollution, poisonous things came, but river rejuvenated. So the ecosystem, if you give it a chance, it has a capacity to rejuvenate. We have seen the kind of COVID crisis also. Now, what is perhaps required is a kind of good understanding, connecting with people. Another example I will give you, I just remember, because during this crisis, we are trying to engage with the students and youth and other people through an online quiz on Ganga. And compared to last year, the response this year is tremendous. I mean, almost 20 times more than last year. People are at home, lockdown condition, and then we are trying to engage them constructively through the Ganga Quest, which is an online quiz, and students are working, youth are working. It's open for anyone, not only limited to a student. So that's very important. I'm really very happy because so many of you have given such a good idea. What lies, I mean, the problem of this thing or adaptive government and governance has to depend upon collaborative partnership. many people told about learning. So I also thought that we have to continuously learn. We have to continuously exchange, learn from experiences of others. We have to do research. We have to use all the new technology, whether it is AI or big data analysis, to basically go ahead, keep ahead of in this game, because various factors, only when we keep on collaborating with each other and learning, it will help. And it's basically not only survival of the fittest, now it's survival of the most adaptive person. So I think that's the idea which I would like to set before us, that managing a river basin of this size, we have to have a kind of adaptive, we have to keep on changing pace with the changes. We should develop that capacity, and then with all these ideas, with all the experience which we have seen from you people, I think perhaps that's the way. Okay, so back to Victor.
Thank you very much, sir. In fact, given your vast experience and given your vast knowledge in this area, it is very nice to see and hear your perspectives about this. It's very interesting that you actually stressed quite a lot on collaborative efforts, where you have different ministries working together, because river management, and I also kind of believe that, it can't be the job of just one ministry or one organization, so there has to be that synergy within the efforts taken, even within the governance structure. Also learning, I was really impressed that, it's always important to be one step ahead, so learn, about what are the drivers of river health, what is going to cause the problems, and then adapt accordingly. So thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful insights. This was a time for question and answers actually, and we have been flooded with so many questions. So I would like to apologize to the attendees. We might not be able to take everything. In fact, I just want to take one question, a common question, which I'm going to pass it on to all the speakers here. But what we will do is we will try to answer your questions individually. We might, if the speakers can respond, or even if at our level, a lot of these questions at NIUA level, NMCG level, we would be able to respond to, and we will make every effort to answer that questions. We are also running a little out of time, so we might not be able to take so many questions. So just one question. In fact, I've tried to summarize quite a few of the questions from the audience. And if I just quickly ask every speaker here, if you could within 30 to 40 seconds, just tell us, so that one big lesson that you think that this COVID crisis has taught us, for river management, so that one lesson, that we should keep in mind, as we step out of this, and hopefully we will step out of this crisis very soon. Okay, but let's not forget what has happened, and what is that one big lesson that we should take ahead. So perhaps I'll start in the same order as we started, starting with Michael, perhaps.
Thank you, Victor. In LA, in this lockdown condition, lockdown is not the way we like to describe it, but we are finding constantly that people are breaking sort of the recommended rules to go to parks, to go to open spaces, to go to nature, to go to the beach, to go to the ocean. Yes, they want to, everyone is dying to get back to restaurants and these things, but honestly, everyone wants to go connect to nature. And so I think what that is showing us, that the things that we all talk about in terms of those intangible connections to nature and how important they are, and what we've touched on a little bit, how difficult it is to put those, how important that is in the context of economic judgment, which is how we make decisions about investment so often. I just think it's proving that these resources, these areas are critical for people to experience. And especially, I'll say, for the LA River, it runs through a lot of communities that don't have a lot of other options and are far away from the ocean, and they need these outdoor spaces to connect to also on everyday life.
Thank you very much, Michael. We'll go quickly over to Peter.
Yes, thank you, Victor. Just to follow on from Michael, one of the things that I've learned from 50 years of environmental management is we should always learn from nature. Nature's been around a lot longer than human beings. They've done a lot of things using trial and error over a long period of time. And so one of the things we need to do as humans is try and learn from nature. How does nature clean up a river? How does nature preserve biodiversity? How does nature deal with waste? These are all things that we can learn. And take Alex's point, let's try and bring everyone together to learn from nature.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's learn from nature. Wonderful. Let's go on to Chris now.
Yeah, that was brilliant, Peter. There's been one really big lesson, and that is that we can, as a global community, respond to a crisis. And David Attenborough made a comment the other day that this COVID crisis is just a minor blip on a much bigger crisis which is coming, which is climate change. We're going to get over this COVID crisis. Climate change, we might not survive, and it's going to go on God knows how long. So we have learned we can respond, we can do something. So I think like the climate change fraternity are going to be all fired up with enthusiasm after this crisis because they know we can do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. We will certainly get out of this crisis. There is no doubt about it. But there are bigger things to worry about. So absolutely, completely agree with you on that. Alex, I know you already shared a lot of lessons. Maybe one more, if possible.
Well, I think there's many lessons we can learn from the COVID crisis. And in a few months' time, we will even have a longer list. For me, I think on top of that list would be potentially response time. I experienced SARS. We developed modeling on SARS. We, saw MERS. There was quite a lot of different crises happening. But this time I was really so clear that sort of losing just a few days in the decision-making and planning process can cost thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of lives, right? And I know here from Australia, for instance, that immediately there was a task force together and scientists, and there was a need for data and modeling, and all of that was actually not there. It was just partially there. So I think my lesson learned is to be prepared. And for instance, to really, we heard this, to collect the data, develop the modeling, we are likely to need in the future because this won't be the last time. And that has a lot to do with funding, right? So, for instance, we developed once a model when SARS happening for all of Asia and Australia. But in the moment the crisis was over, all funding was gone. There was no data update, and the model was sort of outdated. So that's, sort of thinking long term and getting ready. That's to minimize response time. That would be my main lesson.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just being prepared to respond to the situation. Have all the decision support structures in place. Wonderful. We'll move on to Rajiv sir. Finally, sir, your final comments.
But the resilience with which people reacted and then the way it is being managed is one of the great lessons. And I also agree. Nature is perhaps the best teacher. And this is the time, the lesson which we have learned from our perspective, that rivers, nature, so many positive things also happened. Now the lesson should be how we keep our behavior regulated, learning from this, that we respect nature, we respect ecology, and keep these things in similarly healthy condition, because it's not that due to lockdown nature should improve. Nature should improve when we are also going and enjoying that nature in a restrained way.
Okay, thank you very much, Rajiv sir. Absolutely, respecting nature. So I think the lessons are pretty much clear. They're not very difficult lessons, and that for me is the more encouraging part. It's not something that is very difficult to do. It's just that we have to put our minds to it and perhaps get some processes in place, and then it would be very much possible. So thank you all the speakers for your wonderful input to this IDEAthon. We're purposely calling this an IDEAthon because I think this has given us a lot of ideas of how we go ahead, and trust us, and trust me, we will be using a lot of these ideas in the work that I am currently doing as in my project in association with the National Mission for Clean Ganga. So with that, we just have a couple of minutes. If I can just hand it back to Rajiv sir to tell us a little bit about, to just sum up the whole thing and perhaps give us what would be the way forward in the next few days or so.
Thank you. I think we have discussed quite at length, and the way forward once again. And I am really very happy because several of the panelists, they on their own offered to be in touch to share some of the resources. The very purpose of this IDEAthon in this context was to really deliberate. Sometimes what we know or what we think also validate that. So the way forward, in my opinion, will be again to set up some sort of collaborative mechanism with the experts who are here, plus some of the people in the audience. So one thing which will be like many questions would have come. So as Victor, you also said, we should actually try to compile between NMCG and NIUA, and we should try to respond and interact so that this group becomes larger. And second, see, each of the experts have covered one particular area. I mean, in case of LA, a kind of practice of a river and several things what they did. Of course, River Ganga will be quite different from the River LA. So we have to understand that difference between each other. But yes, certain things can easily be learned. So maybe if we create a forum with different experts on different aspects, and if people agree, maybe on biodiversity, we have another conference where we have more of the people. It may not be in this shape, but maybe a kind of roundtable with some of the experts who are working with us on biodiversity. And Dr. Chris, I'm just giving an example. Same thing could be done with each one of them. So I think the collaboration has to be strengthened, and I will request everyone, all the panelists, to help us to agree to it. So we can also share a lot of our information, because this mission also, there's so many learning points, so many things we can learn from each other. So I think we should develop a kind of framework, if everyone agrees, for a kind of continuing this kind of collaboration, develop a framework where we can perhaps develop a theme, and then maybe along with NIUA, another like Wildlife Institute of India works with us, they can pick up one topic like that. We can pick up certain theme, and then maybe bring some of the experts from our side, and then deliberate maybe for half an hour, 1 hour, then also exchange our ideas, our publications, etc. So I think that could be in my opinion, a very welcome thing if everyone agrees. So that I will suggest. Plus whatever research, whatever paperwork, or whatever work we are doing on the urban planning, because actually there could be a lot between river city planning and all that. So I think that theme you are working. So I think with the help of all these experts, I will be requesting all of them, whatever document we are producing, we can also share with them and get their opinions, because that will also help us in improving it further. So let's work out some of these framework. We could not take many questions, so we must discuss immediately and then see how many of them have given questions, and then frame some replies, and then develop a forum with them, develop some sort of group. Idea is create a framework for this collaboration to proceed. It should not be one-off webinar and then we forget about it, but rather we will be very happy to carry it forward by all means. And I once again thank everyone on behalf of NMCG for such an excellent idea to be shared with us, taking time off, and especially for Mr. Michael, it's really quite late for you now. So a special thanks to you for remaining awake till midnight, beyond midnight perhaps. Thank you.
Yes, Michael. Yeah, you deserve special thanks for that. So yeah, absolutely. In fact, this is just the beginning, and as we have already discussed with NMCG, the speakers, I think it's setting a stage here. This was to set a stage of further work that we could all do together. One aspect, which of course Sir mentioned, was in terms of some joint forums or something of that sort. I was also thinking of some joint projects, if we could also do that. But then this is the start. This is the start of something very nice, and it's up to us to all to take it forward. I would also encourage the attendees. If anybody is really interested in this area, if there is something that you have in mind, some innovative concept, please reach out to me. I think my email address is being circulated in the chat box. I would be very happy to talk to you, and let's get some thinking started, and let's go ahead with this. So once again, on behalf of NMCG and NIUA. I would like to thank all of you for attending this, the attendees. You've been very patient. We started off with 271 attendees, and we still have 204. So that's not a very bad dropout rate. So it's perfectly okay. And thank you so much for staying attentive, for participating in the polls that we were conducting by the side, and a special thanks to the speakers. So you for taking that. For taking the time out. I know it is not easy to communicate. Not easy with the time zones, and of course Australia and India was quite okay. Sri Lanka was fine, but yeah, Michael, again, we have to thank you one more time, for taking that special effort. And we will stay in touch, and we will definitely, together we can all decide, at least start to bring about a change. Thank you very much once again. The recording of this webinar will be available very shortly. Please follow our Twitter handle, NIUA handle, or the NMCG handle, and then you will know where this is going to be uploaded. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so long.
Thank you. Bye-bye.